Welcome to our weekly National News Conference. I'm Sandy Close, Director of Ethnic Media Services. Today, our focus is on a question each of us asks almost every time we venture outside. If I'm fully vaccinated, where and when do I need to wear a mask? What if I'm only partially vaccinated or not vaccinated at all? As the country reopens, guidelines differ. The Centers for Disease Control says vaccinated people can forego a mask. The World Health Organization says even vaccinated people should wear masks. Ultimately, we have to make the decision ourselves. And we've asked 3 experts for advice we can share with our audiences. They are Dr. Eric Feigl Ding, a public health scientist and senior fellow at the Federation of American Scientists. Dr. Jose Perez, Chief Medical Officer for the South Central Family Health Center in Los Angeles, whom we welcome back as a speaker, and Dr. Ben Newman, Chief Virologist at the Global Health Research Complex at Texas A&M University, whom we also welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us today. We ask you to speak slowly for our interpreters. We invite reporters to enter questions in the chat box, and we will send a video of today's briefing and expanded bios for the speakers following today's call. Next week, the EMS briefing will feature Centers for Disease Control Director Rochelle Walensky, who will lead a panel of subject matter experts updating us on the campaign to vaccinate all Americans. This will be the first of 3 CDC briefings for ethnic media nationwide over the coming months. Now I turn the conference over to today's moderator and co-coordinator of our briefings, Sunita Sarabji. Sunita.
Thank you, Sandy. And thank you to all of our reporters who have joined the call today. We are going to do a little bit of a different format than our usual. Today's discussion will be a panel discussion. I will kick off by asking a few questions. Sandy and Pilar will also ask questions. And then for the remaining half hour, we ask reporters to ask their questions. So lots of time today for people to ask their good questions. So we'll kick it off for all 3 panelists. I'd like to ask you personally, what are each of you doing regarding masks, and how are you advising your families? Are you wearing masks in some situations, and what situations might those be? Let's start off with Dr. Feigl Ding.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This is one of the biggest topics of our times. Now, we've obviously had many discussions and debates over the last year about masks. And I think the key things are that the studies show, CDC's own studies show that masks help, especially if you double mask, because the cloth mask itself is more of a source control, as in the source of the spray of the aerosols. The cloth masks mostly help, but it's not good for inhalation. But if you have double masks, 2 cloth masks, or a cloth mask and a regular surgical mask, it makes a huge difference in the reduction of the aerosols inhaled by someone else. And these are CDC's own MMWR studies. So masks definitely work. And of course, premium masks also are even better, whether it's KN95, other people call FFP2, KF94s. And of course, the super premium masks, the 3M N95 masks are even better. And studies clearly show that hospitals and healthcare workers who use N95 have much better benefits than just one single surgical mask alone. So I think the science is really settled around masks. The issue is whether vaccinated people should still wear masks. Now, that gets into data on vaccine efficacy. And the vaccine efficacy obviously changes with the different variants. But let's talk about the Delta variant, which is now the dominant, more than 50% variant. And this is what's dominating UK, this is what hit India. So I think Delta variant is the variant of our times right now. And I always tell people Delta variant is not like any previous variant we've seen. Delta variant is a 2.0 pandemic variant. It is faster, higher, stronger, like in the Olympic terms. It is 2 times more transmissible than the oldest strain, Wuhan 1.0. It's about 50 times more transmissible than the Alpha. And in terms of severity, it is 4 times more severe than the original, 4 to 5. There's another study that says 4.9. 4 to 4.9 times greater risk of hospitalization than the original strain. 2.5-fold greater hospitalization than the Alpha. So basically, it's faster, it's more severe, and it's very vaccine evasive. And this vaccine evasiveness is the one-dose vaccination efficacy. You have to not just focus on the hospitalization. Sometimes people say hospitalization is great, it's 95, 96%. Israel says 93% against Delta variant hospitalization, but it's more that whether you mask is to protect others, right? And half the country is not vaccinated. And in some parts of the country, some states are 30% fully vaccinated. And some counties in the US are less than 20% vaccinated. They're in the teens in terms of fully vaccinated population. Because one dose is not enough. One dose, the efficacy is, by the way, like 18% in one study, 30% in another study. It is way too low. With 2 doses, the efficacy for AstraZeneca, which US doesn't use, is about 60%. But even with Pfizer, now you hear Pfizer efficacy is great, 88, 85%. That's for symptomatic. For total, including asymptomatic, Israel reports 64%, 70%. UK, Scotland reports 79%. We're talking about numbers in the 70s and as low as 64% for total infection. And we know that vaccinated people can transmit. And this is proven in all the contact tracing studies in Singapore. Singapore, there were myriads of cases, like not myriads, but actually 24 cases or more in which there were transmission from vaccinated to vaccinated, vaccinated to unvaccinated, and unvaccinated to unvaccinated people, but which the chain originally started with a vaccinated person. And contact tracing in Singapore is by far the best in the world. US contact tracing cannot even come close. So we know that that happens. So the asymptomatic transmission is really serious. Vaccinated people can transmit for sure. Also in Australia, Delta variant has now properties of fleeting exposure transmission, as in people who were literally brushed past each other in the shopping mall, within 5 seconds of proximity, the other person was infected with fleeting, a mere seconds exposure, quote unquote, according to New South Wales, Australia health officials. This is why it's incredibly worrisome, because it is very transmissible. It is much more severe. It is 1-dose vaccine, very evasive. 2-dose efficacy is good, but for transmission, for total infection, it is not good enough. And it will allow the virus to keep spreading to vulnerable people and children who are not vaccinated. And that's why the urgency, WHO comes out clearly that vaccinated people still need to mask. LA County recommends it, Illinois recommends it, California Capital also recommends and for their staff to mask even if vaccinated. So I think CDC is wrong here, and I think it's a little bit too narrow focused on just self-protection whenever so many people are not fully vaccinated.
Absolutely. Dr. Perez, I'd like you to answer that question. And I have an additional question for you. You serve, your community health clinic serves some of the most vulnerable people in Los Angeles County. I wonder what additional guidelines you are giving them as to mask wearing, along with what you are personally doing.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. It's a pleasure to be here again and talking to you guys. But I want to echo what Dr. Feigl-Ding says. I mean, it's clear that masking works. and even in vaccinated, I mean, he made it clear that even vaccinated people are at a higher risk of developing this Delta variant. So even vaccinated people should be wearing masks now, especially when they're going to be in contact in large groups. Add on top of that, the lower vaccination rates in some of the areas. In LA, in the LA area where I work, for example, only about 40% of the population is vaccinated, which means 60%, 6 out of 10 people that I cross paths in the street and in the clinics have not been vaccinated. So all those people are going to be, if they are exposed to the Delta variant, they are at a high risk of developing the disease. As Dr. Feigelding so eloquently put, it's a faster and better virus to infect people and to get people sick. So my recommendation to everyone really in the South LA area is wear a mask, especially if you're going to be in places where having 6 to 10 feet distance from other folks is not going to be possible. Sort of like in the supermarkets and in public transportation, stuff like that. I agree with Dr. Feigelding as well. I mean, the CDC guidelines, just like anything in government, takes it lags behind, and I think they try to set out recommendations for an entire country. But as we do in medicine, if we take the entire country as just different patients in different areas, you kind of tailor a little bit your message and your therapeutics based on the patient themselves. You put everyone that has high cholesterol on a statin, but different people may have different levels of statins. The same way here, high vaccinated areas, you might be able to get away with just one mask instead of a double mask, or you may be able to get closer. But the entire message is you need to be masked. At my family gathering in July 4th, we ended up segregating everybody by age group. My octogenarian parents and the older folks, the 50 plus vaccinated, we ended up hanging out together, while my children and our grandchildren were sort of more distant, and we were wearing masks as well. So the message is clear that we should be wearing masks.
Absolutely. Dr. Newman, I would like to ask you the same question, but I would also like you to comment on the paper released by Nature yesterday, which got a lot of coverage, and I'm sure you've read it, which said that the Delta variant can evade the immune system. In light of that, I wonder if you could start by explaining the paper a little bit for lay people, and then also in light of that, what guidelines would you recommend for mask wearing?
All right, thanks for asking.
Yeah.
So I'm in Texas, and I am the only person in my place of work who routinely wears a mask now. Yeah, and I suppose that's typical. And I do not like that one bit, but here we are. I also know that Texas is home to 2 of the recently identified clusters of under-vaccination in the US. And quite honestly, that puts Texas as a risk to the rest of the country. And yeah, it just makes Texas a risky place to be in general. So yeah, I like masks quite a bit. I think the debate tends to center around the idea of how hard should we try to get rid of COVID-19. I would argue, if I want to make a mistake, I want to make a mistake on the side of certainty. I would like to see this thing gone and yeah, push as hard as we can until it is gone. Let's see. On the points that were made before, I think Dr. Feigelding and Perez absolutely nailed it. The masks are the one piece of guidance that actually is quite effective. You'll see people do a lot of things. All the hand sanitizer, the little tiny stupid plexiglass shields that the air goes right around and above. All of this stuff and the one way in and one way out of a room, these are much less effective than masking. And with masking, the way I figure it, you are trying to reduce maybe 99 to 100% of the infection. With all of these other measures combined, you are probably chasing between 0 and 1% of infection. And frankly, it's puzzling why people do the one thing that doesn't work rather than the thing that does. In terms of the outlook right now, we've seen 3 weeks of steadily rising cases in the US as a whole. And while it looks like most of that is attributable to the Delta variant, and that's certainly all that we're seeing in local testing here in Texas, it is very slow to get back sequencing results. The average time is about 5 weeks from when a person spits in a tube to when you actually can say it's alpha, it's delta, something like that. And so again, I very much prefer to err on the side of keeping everybody safe and certain. In terms of the recent developments in vaccine evasion, so the features of Delta, there are many different changes in this virus. There are only a few of the changes where we have any idea of what the actual effect of the change is. And so we tend to focus on those, particularly the ones in the spike. But there are almost certainly other changes that are giving the virus some kind of competitive advantage against your lung, your immune system, and against other viruses. In this part of the country, Alpha arose and basically drove all the other strains to extinction. Delta is doing that right now, and it's doing it to Alpha. So yeah, this is a very aggressive strain in terms of how it spreads. In terms of immunity, the Delta variant is like a combination of some things that we've seen around. So there is a particular named variant that's very common in Texas and Mexico, or was before it got pushed out, that had one of the mutations that you find in Delta. The other mutation is one that was common in California, but then ended up spreading to just about everywhere. And while these changes would decrease the effectiveness of the first line of immunity, the part that keeps you from getting infected in the first place, this Delta variant is still close enough to all the other variants that we would expect to see very good vaccine efficacy, at least in terms of protecting people from extreme sickness and death. And that does appear to be mostly what is seen. So the vaccine works. We have the tools that we need to stop this between vaccines and masks. And the difficulty is one of public relations, basically convincing people to do the right thing, even though it's a step more difficult and annoying than doing the wrong thing.
Absolutely. I'd like to ask a question of all three speakers. So we know that the vaccines that we currently have are 95% effective against hospitalizations, which if you do the math in our country, that means that 18 million people are still vulnerable to getting infected. The CDC has recently released numbers saying that there are 13,000 breakthrough infections. Are these significant numbers, and should we be looking at these seriously, or are these just one-offs? I open this up to anybody who wants to answer first.
I think it's a moving target, unfortunately, and I think it's the nature of viruses and genetics. Viruses are their main thing is to reproduce and produce the next generation of their own. And unfortunately, the whole way that the DNA and the genetics works, there are intrinsic errors made precisely to give advantages to viruses and bacteria and other pathogens, so they can be successful in reproducing and moving on to the next generation. So it is a moving target. Unfortunately, it's not something that we can say once we're done with the Delta variant, we're done. We thought we could say that with the Alpha variant, and here we are with another one more virulent and more infectious. I do want to make a comment regarding the wearing of the mask. I think the message has to be tailored a little bit. I think the healthcare society and all of us is really clear to us from the science that masks are successful in preventing and reducing infection. But I take a step back and outside of the politics, why is it that people don't want to wear masks? And it dawned on me that, and I think it may be clear to most other people, is the social aspect of it. We had a little bit of a test cases with behavioral health. Way in the pandemic, a lot of our patients that suffer from anxiety and depression, and they were coming into our clinic because they needed to see the therapist. We started seeing, we saw patients with masks. And we saw a tremendous drop in the number of patients seeking mental health services. And then we implemented telehealth, and where we're seeing patients through devices. And our no-show rate dropped like a stone. Everybody was gathering. I'm thinking, well, what's the difference? And then it just dawned on me, is the ability for people and the providers to see the facial expressions and all those social messages that are conveyed. So it seems to me that we have to change our slightly and not be so punitive maybe when addressing the population in general about the need to wear masks, and just acknowledging the fact that yes, it is a nuisance. You can't see somebody smile. You can't see somebody who's angry at you. You miss all those social cues. But the benefit of maybe missing on some of that is the fact that you'll prevent 1 or 2 or 3 or 1,000 deaths. So I think our message needs to be tailored a little bit better.
Absolutely. I have one final question before I open it up to Sandy Pilar and then to our reporters. Our kids are going back to school in next month, and we've got a lot of under 12s who are not going to be vaccinated at that point. A lot of them live in multi-generational families with grandparents, etc. What should our guidelines be for the K through 6 set? Dr. Feigelding, would you like to take this question?
For K through 12, yeah, so today CDC just released some new guidelines that I'm not very happy about. Basically implied that even if there's no mandates or rules for masks, for vaccinations, for air quality and testing, they can still go back to school, and it's all entirely based on local community transmission. And I think that is a very, very much an abdication of responsibility and abdication of precautionary principle, because we know kids transmit. Kids transmit it to their parents. There's million-person studies in Denmark showing the more children there are in a household, the greater risk of infection for the adults. And it's very dose response. As in, the more kids there are in the household, the greater risk to the parents. And we also seen that the transmission was not only to kids, but also to the parents, but not 20-year-olds, but to 30-year-olds, which is the parents of young school children. And we've seen cases soar. Once Israel lifted the mask mandate for school kids, cases soared immediately in Israel. Once England and Scotland lifted the mask mandates back in, I think, March, cases soared immediately in children. And same thing also, whenever schools were in session and out of session, cases soared. And this is why we really need masks for children. But more than that, we need ventilation and air disinfection, because we can't always open windows whenever possible. But some people say it's too hot, some places too cold, in some places the windows just don't open. And so we need air disinfection, because the key is air exchanges, whether fresh air exchanges or disinfection air. This is an airborne virus. And as Dr. Newman mentioned, plexiglass are pandemic theater in many ways. They are useless against an airborne virus that will just dissipate and diffuse throughout a room. what we need is ventilation. In public health, we used to say the solution to pollution is dilution. The solution to an airborne transmission is air dilution of ventilation and air disinfection with CDC recommended HEPA filters or CDC recommended UV, not any other, ionizer or anything like that that is not proven whatsoever. And there's a lots of, sales gimmicky things for these other cleaners. Stick with portable HEPA filters, which every teacher can buy, and the schools have money in the Biden COVID relief package to buy these devices, portable HEPA filters, UV disinfection, not on the children, but like upper air UV as well as portable UV devices. Those are the best things in absence of vaccination. And I'm hopeful that by the end of September, early October, we will have vaccine trial results and EU emergency authorization for vaccines for age 5 to 11. And soon after in November, December, age 2 to 4. But until then, we need to have mitigation, because you can't just say kids are immune. That is not true. 1 in 12 children get long COVID. 1 in 7 adults, 1 in 12 children. And that is not an acceptable statistic. If I said your car seat has a failure rate of 1 in 12, no one would buy this car seat. No one would accept those kind of risks. And the amount of long COVID symptoms should not be dismissed. It's not like a long COVID among a 60-year-old. Long COVID in children could stay with them and hurt their development for many, many years. So there are solutions, but just abdicating it all and saying, no, masks are not required, vaccinations among teachers are not required, air disinfection, air cleaning, ventilation is not required, testing not required, let's just see how the local cases are. That is not good public health.
Thank you. Do either of the other speakers want to respond to this question before I turn it over to Sandy? Okay, Sandy, do you have questions for the speakers?
I have a ton of questions, but I also see all these great questions in the chat box.
Right.
So I will ask one question, which I know is politically delicate, but which I'm really, it's irresistible to not to want to ask, which is, why is the CDC so you could say conservative about wanting people to wear masks? What's holding them back? What aren't they seeing? Is this politics, or is this science driven? And I guess I would ask all three. We had trouble. Sorry, just to set the context a bit. I think the CDC was silenced during the Trump administration, so it's a relief to have an active messaging from the CDC that they've reached out. I'm just, how do we read their messaging around masks?
I'll just quickly jump in, and please, I don't want to hog this conversation. I think there's two things. There's a lot of studies that show that if, and I don't agree that this is what they should do, but the studies suggest that if you give people more freedoms, if they're vaccinated, that maybe they'll be more willing to vaccinate. If you dangle a carrot, hey, you can take off your mask if you can, we'll give you more freedoms. Like in some surveys, people express some survey-based willingness, but I don't think it'll actually translate to much, headway into the vaccine-resistant, vaccine-hesitant crowd. But I think that there's some of the polls, I think, may encourage the CDC to think, oh, let's just use it as a carrot. But the problem is, of course, it just, what conservatives hear is that, oh, CDC says you don't have to wear a mask, even though the nuance is you don't have to wear a mask if vaccinated. And I think once you get the toothpaste out of the tube, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube anymore and get people to re-mask up. I think it's a grave mistake. But I think they did it based on that kind of, let's dangle it as a carrot. and which I think is a really big academic mistake just based on reading the polls.
Thank you.
Dr. Newman and Dr. Perez, it would be interesting to hear your responses as well on this question.
Sure. Short response in, Texas centric, because this is the world that I see. When we had a state mask mandate, you had people saying, well, my church doesn't require it, so I'm not going to mask up there.
Right.
When we had a national mandate, but the state was saying, do what you like, people said, well, I'm going to go with my governor. Yeah. Rather than the CDC. And when the CDC finally says, hey, it's okay, just be happy, then yeah, what's left? People have been shopping around, asking mom when dad says no all this time. And unfortunately, we're running out of parents here. So it's just the medical community. And I'm not even properly a part of that. I'm a scientist, but it's frustrating to see, I have to say.
Absolutely. Dr.
Yeah, I
Perez.
think given the missteps that the CDC did early on in the pandemic, I think they are being extremely cautious because of the public perception of what the entity is about. They did commit some big mistakes with the early testings and the early vaccines, and I think that makes them politically more careful because they don't want to damage their reputation. And I think the other part of it is that, in our system of government, there's always this push and pull between what the central government, the federal government mandates, and what the states want to do, and the freedoms to do locally what they feel is best for their communities. And I think we're seeing that at play. And even within, I think even within the three of us, you may hear some nuances. Even though the three of us are doctors, you'll see a little bit of nuances in the way that we approach the recommendations that we do to our families. So it's not surprising that when you put in together 400 million people, that you're going to end up having 400 million opinions. And again, and for our standpoint as a doctor, I can't force anyone to do anything. All I can do is give recommendations, and at the end of the day, it's the individual that has to make the decision. Hopefully, they're listening to the right advice, and they'll do the right thing from a science perspective. But the community members, every single American, is hearing all these different voices, and they're going to choose whatever voice that rings true in their head. Hopefully the CDC will, be a little bit more aggressive. I agree. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of other voices like the three doctors that are here that are spreading a little bit of a different message in how we should approach this and how to protect yourself and your families.
Pilar Marrero, who is our co-coordinator on these briefings. Pilar, do you have a question?
Something quick, because I want us to go to the reporters' questions, but just comment briefly, all of you, please, on the impact of transmission, and obviously masks are a key in transmission, on the creation of variants. People still don't seem to get, and I don't think this has been discussed enough, that variants come from the transmission of the virus, and they slow down as, I think, that's what I understand, they slow down as transmission slows down. Can you explain clearly, what's the relationship between, transmission, using of masks, and the creation of new variants that are more dangerous?
Dr. Newman, do you want to start off?
Sure. There is a very direct relationship between the virus growing and the virus mutating, because this is a virus that will make mistakes automatically as part of its growth. For the virus, this is a fitness advantage. The way I imagine it, imagine you had a plumber who comes to your house and he will have all these different wrenches for any possible thing that would need to be opened or closed. The virus is very small, and so it can't carry a full toolbox. And so what it does is bring in one medium-sized wrench and then mutate it a little bit, larger or smaller, so that it can do whatever the job needs to be. This is just how viruses function. And there are actually studies where if you turn down the virus's ability to change, the virus becomes less fit and dies out. So anywhere that the virus is growing, whether it's in a child or a young person, even if there is no disease, the virus is changing. And once the virus has made a change, it will continue to change, but it usually won't change back. So mutations will continue to accumulate indefinitely. And there's always something new and generally bad around the corner because of natural selection. The only virus that's going to be able to knock Delta off of the winner's circle is going to be something that is more aggressive than Delta. And it is merely a matter of time until that happens.
So may I ask
I
a
concur.
follow-up question there? Is the P1 variant more aggressive than Delta? And do we need to be concerned about the spread of P1 in this country?
P1 is a good question. P1 is also known as the Brazil variant. I think it's now called Gamma, I believe. But it's not. It's more transmissible than the old one for sure. I think, but it's kind of like the second most transmissible. It's a little more transmissible than Alpha, and Alpha was already pretty transmissible, but it's not as transmissible as the Delta. The Delta is by far, by leaps and bounds, the most transmissible. And so the P1 is, it's losing to Delta basically. Right now, and as Dr. Newman mentioned, basically, the more warm bodies that the virus has, the more opportunities it'll have to mutate. A virus can't mutate if you can't replicate. And in certain ways, masks don't have to worry about efficacy of vaccines. Mass ventilation, they are universal against the coronavirus, right? That is, they are, virus evolution free. They filter out the virus just the same, whether it's the old Wuhan strain or whether it's the Delta or another one. But I think the more bodies that, and this is where the mass infection policies of UK is horrible, and why some of the no masks needed right now is horrible, given that so many people are unvaccinated. And you can say we're 70% vaccinated, one shot. That doesn't really matter here. Israel is 60% two-shot Pfizer vaccinated, and they're seeing really crazy surges. UK is the same, Scotland is the same, they're seeing surges. They're more vaccinated than the US. And they're seeing surges. Hospitalizations, ICU beds, they're all seeing surges. The virus right now will grow and grow and grow until you basically get to an incredibly high herd level. So this is why the virus, the more we let it mass infect and don't take mitigations against it, it will eventually find one unlucky person, such as an immunocompromised person, someone suffering from cancer, another immune disorder, and it will hypermutate in that person, or it combines with another variant, maybe P1, and then they can recombine and find an even worse mutation. And someday, once people are, let this spread enough, we will get another variant. There's a reason there's no New Zealand variant. There is no Taiwan variant, because those countries kept the virus under control. And if you let it spread, it will mutate. And that's just fact of life and nature. And just like we play whack-a-mole with basically super bugs against the TB that are antibiotic resistant because they've already mutated resistance against so many other drugs, the virus will keep doing that. And the only way to stop it is the mutation-free approach, which is ventilation, masks. And those things combined with vaccination is what will stop it, not just relying on vaccination alone. And that's the ultimate mistake that many people think, that we will vaccinate our way out of it without anything else.
Thank you so much.
Extremely well said. I would also add to that, as much as a segment of the population may not like to hear the idea, I think masks are here to stay. I think this is a wonderful lesson and educational opportunity to the world at large as to how biology works. Because if you look at the cases of the flu in Australia, they had none last year. Why? Because the same things that we can do to prevent COVID are the same things that we can do to prevent the flu. And we have thousands and thousands of deaths related to the flu every year that can also be prevented if these particular things can be put in place. So I think so we have a wonderful opportunity to teach our population as to how to prevent these diseases. And as much as we may not like it, I think that masks are probably here to stay. You know, in a couple of years, 5, 6, 10 years from now, when it's flu season, I wouldn't be surprised if a segment of the population, you'll see them wearing masks, because we've learned that it is a way to prevent not only the COVID, but the flu and some of all these other viruses.
Important information. Thank you, Dr. Perez.
I
We're
could
going
say
to
one
open the
more.
call.
Newman
Oh,
has-
please.
Yeah, it's fun,
Yes.
yeah. So the way I look at which variant is growing or not is to go on, it's a site called nextstrain.org. It's one of the ones, but I think it has the easiest graphics to interpret. And if you go to nextstrain.org and then go to the global COVID stats page, and then scroll down, there's a little rectangle that says frequencies colored by clade. And it's a timeline starting from the beginning and going to right now. And anything that you see that's doing that is something that is aggressively growing. So Delta is the most aggressively spreading right now. Beta and Gamma are holding their own, but not really increasing. And Kappa, Lambda, and Iota appear to be doing the same, maybe slightly growing, but it's mostly Delta out there.
Fantastic. We're going to open the call up to questions from reporters. We begin with Jorge Macias. Jorge? All right, we'll move on to Arteli. Oh, there you are. Jorge, we can't hear you, so could you type your question in the chat box and we'll attempt to answer it through there. Arteli Martinez, could you ask your question, please?
Hello, thank you. I would like to see if the doctors have seen an increase of people going to get their vaccine after this Delta variant surge.
Arteli, could you repeat your question?
Yes, thank you. My question is, do you see more people taking the vaccine after the Delta variant is surge?
I can answer from the South LA perspective, and the answer is a big no. The demand for vaccines has not changed, and in fact is dropping. 2-3 weeks ago, we were vaccinating about 200 people per day at 2 of our vaccine centers, and now we're down to about 35 to 40. So no, the demand for the vaccine is not increasing, and in fact is going the opposite way. So folks are still not being convinced, despite of all the news of how deadly this Delta variant is. So.
And Dr. Newman, you have some perspective on this from Texas as well.
Texas is still Texas. The answer is no. Yeah.
Dr. Feigl-Ding, any response?
I think the polls show that a lot of Americans are still really in the dark on the Delta. Yeah. I think it was 18-20% of people don't really know anything about it, and 55% of the people in total were not concerned. I think only 45% of people were concerned. And if you break it down by vaccinated, unvaccinated, it's actually the unvaccinated who are less concerned. Vaccinated are more concerned, and that just shows, that reflects a political divide of those who aren't vaccinated yet. And so I think it's just really, really worrisome that so many people are in the dark about how bad Delta is. And what worries me about our society is that people don't react until crap hits the fan, basically. Until they see hospitals, ERs filling up, they don't believe it's real. And we saw that last year when New York was filling up, but Texas was not. They thought it was not real. Until it shows up on their doorstep and their friends and family are getting sick, then only then do people take it seriously. And by then, it will be really too late in the pandemic. And then really bad things, severe things like lockdowns will have to go. And no one wants lockdowns. But if you want to avoid lockdowns, you have to act now. But no one wants to act now until they see hospitals filling up. And that's just a sad reality.
Absolutely. Henrietta Burrows. Are you on, Henrietta?
Yes, can you hear me?
There we go.
In the past, we didn't usually think of vaccinated people being carriers of the disease for which they were vaccinated. I mean, there was always Typhoid Mary, who couldn't get it, who was a carrier. But is the fact that those vaccinated against COVID-19 and its variants, is it the fact that they can be carriers, something that is unusual, or is it something that's unique?
No, so in epidemiology, it's called a reservoir, a place where the virus can hang out, and it's like a spa for the virus, mutate, grow, do whatever. Unvaccinated people of any age are a reservoir.
But if people are vaccinated, we thought if they were
Yeah.
vaccinated, they were protected, they couldn't pass it, like with the measles. People who had measles who were vaccinated could play with other people, and it wasn't thought that they could transmit.
It's not sterilizing immunity. What you're thinking about is some diseases, some vaccines are so effective, they have sterilizing immunity. And this disease is evasive enough that we don't have sterilizing immunity. People can carry it. And then the efficacy against carrying it changes. Originally, by the way, most of the 95% original efficacy for mRNA vaccine, those are for symptomatic. It does not include the asymptomatic, because symptomatic was the only easy way for them to measure efficacy. Asymptomatic was very tricky. Eventually, we had asymptomatic efficacy. It was high, but then it started dropping. We know that asymptomatic efficacy for AstraZeneca 2-dose against the Alpha was only like 33%, if you actually dig into the Lancet papers on this. But Delta, it's around 60-some%. Sorry, 33 was for 1-dose AstraZeneca, but it's not relevant here. But for Delta here, again, it's 64 to 70 in the Israel study. It's about 79 in the Scottish national study. And so that's just not enough. And by the way, that's the efficacy, as in, so if it's 10 out of 100, and now it's down to 3 out of 100. So like 70% drop from the control group of unvaccinated group. So it's still leaky, incredibly leaky. And there's something called a Peltzman effect, where if people feel invulnerable, we've seen this at HIV, that once we had a lot of HIV cocktails and drugs, once people feel invulnerable, they have all these prophylaxis and other drugs for it, people start acting more dangerously. They don't take precautions anymore. They throw precaution to the wind. And the worry is that the vaccinated people no longer will take precautions, and they will go party, they will go night clubbing, and then, which is even more dangerous, because now once you balloon the denominator, it will actually cause even greater number of infections. And epi models have shown, if you have a disease that's more contagious but not severe, or more severe but not as contagious, which will kill more people? The reality is that it's the virus that's more contagious and spread to more people, but less severe, will kill more people than just merely more severe and not contagious. Then the problem with Delta is the worst of both worlds. It's 4 times more severe, and it is twice as contagious in terms of R0. And as Dr. Larry Brilliant, who eradicated smallpox decades ago, said, the Delta variant is more transmissible than smallpox. So this is why we have such a problem.
Vansh Gupta has a really interesting question about young people. Vansh, could you ask your question, please?
Of course. Can everyone hear me, first of all?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So doctors, my question to you is, there are 2 questions actually. So first question is, young 20, 21-year-olds, mostly males, my friends, I'd say, are people who believe that because they're vaccinated, they don't have to wear a mask, they don't have to follow social distancing protocols, they don't need to put hand sanitizer on, they can go wherever, do whatever, go to the gym, go party, go to nightclubs, whatever. And they think, life is pretty much back to normal. Going to these briefings, reading the news, I know for a fact that's not the case. Experts are ringing the alarm bells. We all know that, if this keeps on spreading, we might, end up going for another lockdown, another shelter in place. So my question to you is, what can we do to, bring that outreach, tell them like, hey, you need to mask up, what actions are being taken and what we have to do. And then secondly, are we actually going to get to a situation where we might have to go into a shelter in place again, or a lockdown, or, a national impose of masks? What is our future looking like? Because we know this is here to stay for at least another year. So we could say it's safe to say.
Dr. Perez, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think you're asking the question for the ages. How do you make young people not take risky behaviors, regardless of whether it's mask or drinking or taking drugs or unprotected sex? I mean, how do you convince a young person not to do these things that can be dangerous to themselves? It's a hard question to answer. Now, we do have a great tool in social media. And I think it's the same way that you utilize for the rest of the population. You identify those people who are venerated and respected in the social circles, and then you use them as a tool to present as an example. I don't know, maybe Britney Spears is a little too old, but grab some of those celebrities, that do believe in this stuff, and put them out in social media, and and show them I'm not hip to who the new artists are or the new celebrities are, but get them those that are that are with it, that understand, that get it, and use them as an example. Peer-to-peer pressure does work in that group, but it is very difficult to have young people not take risks.
Seema Gupta has a similar question about her age group. Dr. Newman, maybe you could answer Seema's question. Seema? Are you there, Seema? Okay, we'll move on to John Davis. John?
Hi, I'm here.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, my question was for Dr. Perez, and he talked about it a little bit in the chat with me, but I specifically cover South LA, where you are at all the time, and I noticed that where I live, there's a higher vaccination rate, it appears, and people are less. But then if I go into the grocery store there, in South LA, it just feels like everybody has their masks on, and they've just kind of decided that like this is just the way it's going to be, because people aren't taking that step to get vaccinated. So I guess with that in mind, I kind of personally feel like over there, people are just kind of just like, okay, we'll just wear masks forever. But that doesn't seem like a way to really end this.
Well, like I said in the chat, I mean, no pandemic will last forever. This will end one way or the other. The question is, how many people are we going to lose on the way to getting there? In just like everything else in behavior, some people acquire the behavior and are very faithful and religious to doing that behavior, wearing masks in this particular case. And then people will fall off naturally of that ladder. What we really would hope is that the desire to wear a mask is really driven by the stories we're presenting here today. If there's a Delta variant that is causing a lot more disease, that folks will take that from trusted sources like their doctors and and all those people on social media, and take that and weave it into their own behavior. I like you. I go grocery shopping around here before I go home, And I do notice that too. A lot of people in the grocery stores around South LA are wearing masks, and that's pretty satisfying. Then when I go to my own neighborhoods where I live, I don't live in South LA anymore. I am from South LA, but I don't live here anymore. And the farther away you get into more affluent areas, you'll see that commitment to wearing masks drop off, which is not good. But it just I just like to hear what you said, because that has been my experience of folks wearing masks.
Absolutely. Does anybody else want to respond to John's question?
I
Ben?
think states have the latitude to do several things about this. You've got Massachusetts versus Jacobson 1905, which gives states the right to compel vaccination. You've got in-school vaccinations, and you've got the ability to require masks, essentially. We're basically waiting for enough politicians who are willing to do the right thing, even though it's not the popular thing, and have been waiting for some time.
Absolutely. Dr. Feigelding?
I think waiting for politicians to do the right thing, especially in conservative states, is somewhat hopeless. I think I'm a little pessimistic, because they will only respond when the hospital beds and ER and are maxed out. That's the only time they will budge, which is too late. In certain ways, right now, CDC is empowering with their poor messaging. I think Dr. Walensky is a great scientist. She was a Harvard professor of the infectious diseases at Brigham. But regarding comms and the optics, I think right now she has to realize what she says has a lot of weight. And right now she's giving credibility to those who are saying we don't need rules. And mass infection is not a strategy. And we know it transmits, but I think, WHO clearly says it transmits. And I just met with WHO leaders yesterday, and this is one of those things that they can't tell individual countries what to do. They can just declare what their stance is. And in certain ways, we can't tell individual states what to do, but the CDC can make clear where the science truly stands and let local leaders like LA County and other places take the lead.
Absolutely. I'd like to conclude with a 20-second soundbite from each of you on how you would advise the 55 million readers and viewers that respond to our ethnic media. Let's start with Dr. Perez.
Yeah, to the Hispanic community, the African American community, all the communities alike, get vaccinated. It's not a political thing. We had experience with vaccine. There's no smallpox anymore. There are very few cases of polio. We have extensive history here. There's nothing politic about it. Get vaccinated and wear a mask. And you'll be happier for it. You know that you will save lives in the process, and it could be your parents, your children, your neighbors. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. Get vaccinated, wear a mask. It's nothing political. Just protect your own community.
Thank you, Dr. Perez. Dr. Newman?
Yeah, protection starts with you. And it doesn't matter how many spineless politicians there are out there. You can go and get your own darn vaccine. And yeah, I think we all should. Somebody's got to take responsibility. Why not let it be you today, right now?
Excellent. Thank you. Dr. Feigelding?
I concur with both Dr. Perez and Newman, but I want to send a message to the local public health leaders, the city, the county, the state public health leaders out there, that the science clearly shows that the virus transmits, and you should not rely on, waiting until we get to herd immunity, because that's very far off. That's probably in the 85-90% range that we now need with the Delta variant being more contagious. We need to rely, we can't just knock our heads against the wall, asking and begging people to vaccinate whenever we've already, harvested all the people who have been willing to vaccinate. We have to think of other strategies outside of the box. We shouldn't just knock our heads against the wall twice as hard. And I think the outside of the box is we need to focus on other mitigations. Until the vaccinations get high enough, we have to focus on other things, and that's masking, ventilation, air disinfection, contact tracing. That's in your hands. All these things, and then mass testing whenever there's hotspots. Those are all in your hands. You can control, you can implement, and I think that take the leadership like LA County did. Take more leadership in all these different approaches, in addition to asking people to vaccinate. Doing all of the above is like the Swiss cheese approach, that even if one approach is leaky, if you layer enough Swiss cheese layers together, you will create a wall. And that's what we want, a wall against COVID, not just a leaky fence against COVID.
Thank you so much to all of you. Sandy, I turn it over to you for closing remarks.
No way to close better than our three speakers just did. Thank you very, very much. I go away much more informed, and I'm going to get a double mask. I have been wearing single mask, and now I'm going to get a double mask. Thank you.
Thank you.